I'm Jason Bradford.
I'm Asher Miller.
And I'm Rob Dietz. Welcome to Crazy Town, where Ronald McDonald is the nominee to head the Food and Drug Administration. Apparently, Twinkie the Kid and Captain Cupcake were unavailable.
Hi, this is Crazy Town producer Melody Allison. If you ever struggle to make sense of our unsustainable and unjust world, or if you just need a good laugh to keep from crying, then you've come to the right place. With equal parts humor and in-depth analysis, Jason, Rob, and Asher probe crazy-making topics like climate change, overshoot, runaway capitalism, and why we're all deluding ourselves. Before we get started, here's a quick warning. Sometimes this podcast uses swear words.
Language!
Thanks for joining us.
Rob and Jason, I'm really glad that you guys agreed to meet with me, and I appreciate you letting me record this. I think it'll make sense to you why, after I share the news I have to share with you, I don't want to have to repeat this conversation with a bunch of people over and over again. So I just thought I'd record it and so I could get it off my chest.
It's a little bit ominous, dude.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I've been with PCI for 16 years or something, and this is probably the most nervous I've been in terms of having a conversation in all that time, because I have some big news I have to share with you guys. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Lay it on us.
Well, you know how I mean, this is not really public, but I've been friends with Alex Jones for a long time, right? I met him. Wait, why are you laughing?
That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
You knew this. I met him when we were trying to sneak into Bohemian Grove. Okay, years ago. And I mean, look, he's gone on a different path than I've gone, but we've stayed friendly. He just got appointed as Trump's press secretary, okay? And he asked me to come on board.
Nice.
All right? InfoWars is done.
Yeah.
Onion bought it. He's available. Yeah. He was asked by Trump to serve as his press secretary. He asked me to come on board to help him, okay? And I didn't understand why, but he said he wants me to basically be the sign language translator for him. I know, and I had the same reaction. But
Do you know sign language?
I don't know sign language, but he said there's only one thing I need to know.
Okay.
And I'm really good at it, which is basically different ways of saying fuck you. Put it on my middle finger, flicking my tooth, doing the chin thing, like that, I'm good at those things.
You're good at you can do this.
And that's all you really need to do as a translator for the Trump, press secretary.
I'm sad that you're stepping down as our executive director, but I think that means I get a shot at the title, so I feel good about that.
Totally.
But
there you go.
I get Trump coins. I get all these perks, guys.
Right.
They don't
Trading
tell
cards.
you about this stuff. Steaks, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Bibles.
You guys, when you have a friend or someone in your family who gets the perfect job, like Jason, when you became a tennis professional, it just fits. And this is perfect. I've seen you gesticulating with your middle finger so many times this year. This is like your dream opportunity.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you guys understand.
It's a sad day for PCI,
it.
but a great day for our country.
Well, nice opening there, and you lost all believability with the longtime friendship with Alex Jones. But
I tried, man. I tried to have a straight face. Obviously, listeners, this was a joke, right? At what point do people realize that, you think?
The opening is very, very apropos for what we want to talk about, though, which is looking at the recent election and electoral politics here in the United States through the lens of Crazy Town. We didn't want to come together and just whine about what's going on or complain or make fun of Trump.
Of course I want to whine, but everyone else is doing that,
Right. Mm-hmm. But we figured that angle is pretty well taken care of. But what we thought we could provide is this Crazy Town lens. So, we're kind of geeky, kind of nerdy. We like the academic stuff. And we thought we would
don't say that. It's going to get us in trouble.
Yes, that's true.
Target right on our back.
I'm a homey, folksy farmer, okay? And a tennis coach. All right?
Tennis, that's the sport of commies right there. reality is shifting beneath our feet. It's really getting bent, if not completely broken. And there are three somewhat wonky concepts that we came up with to look at what's happened in the shifting sands here. The first one is the idea of shifting baselines. The second one is the all-important scientific concept of entropy. And then the third one is kind of more like a policy check with something called the upside of down. So I thought we could go through these three. Okay, I won't call them wonky. I'll
These
call
are
them
common
folksy.
sense, non-wokey concepts.
Right.
Jeez,
Folksy,
Rob, careful.
folk wisdom.
Shifting
you,
baselines.
Nothing scientific here about this. Well, let me start with shifting baselines, a term popularized by a scientist. So this one's already out the window. But
And a
enemy of the
populist.
state.
And a populist.
Right.
A populist scientist. Keep going.
So this comes from Daniel Pauly, the marine scientist who used it to describe something that was going on in fisheries, almost a failing of people that he worked with. And the idea is that what you see right now in the ocean, or what you grew up with, is your baseline for what's supposed to be there. But it might be completely off for what was once ecologically supported. And the idea is from generation to generation, that baseline shifts so that if you have a population of fish that are dying off, then the next generation thinks this depauperate, smaller population is what's supposed to be there. Give you a more concrete example of this. We're all fans of Randy Olson, who was also a marine scientist who became a
household name.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying it's a household name, but I really loved his book, Don't Be Such a Scientist. He became a filmmaker and was trying to help scientists communicate better with the public, maybe helping them be folksy farmers like Jason. And so he had written this op-ed a bunch of years ago where he was talking about salmon in the Columbia River, which is just a little ways north of me. And he had this quote where he said the number of salmon in the Pacific Northwest Columbia River is twice what it was in the 1930s. That sounds great if the 1930s is your baseline date. But salmon by the 1930s were only 10% of what they were in the 1800s. So you already had a baseline that had shifted by that time. So let's talk a little bit about the ways that Trump has shifted baselines for acceptable behavior in American politics and society at large.
How has he not shifted baselines?
I don't think any baseline exists anymore is the problem. He's shattered baselines. And I can say that as a tennis coach. Like, what if you had tennis without a baseline? How would you know if a ball was in or out? You wouldn't. It's a disaster.
It's whoever yells the loudest. It's in.
Well,
no, it's out.
Speaking of yelling the loudest, I mean, you remember back in the day when you could get thrown out of a political campaign for a really minor transgression? I'm thinking of the Dean scream, Howard Dean.
Oh,
Classic.
yes.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah,
So-
yeah.
So he was running for president back in 2004.
Vermont
20 years
governor,
ago.
I think. Vermont governor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a former medical doctor. He kind of
Yes.
had a folksy appeal, and he was leading in the polls to become the Democratic nominee for president. And one of the earliest votes on the nomination process is the Iowa caucuses. And he kind of got trounced by John Kerry. It was unexpected. And afterwards, he gave this rallying speech to his gathered crowd. And he was just running through all the states we were going to go and win and all the way to the White House. And at the end of it, he uttered this guttural, strange, Muppet-like scream.
Please don't do it.
And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House. Ah!
The follow-up to that was the press just beating the crap out of him. I mean, mocking him, basically saying this guy is so unhinged to not be
Right,
presidential.
Not presidential. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you two, I'm sure, can come up with a few examples of things Trump said or did on the way to his rather large victory.
How about filleting his microphone stand?
Yeah,
How about
that was good.
Is that a shifted baseline?
There's so many. It's just kind of a blur right now. Where it's like, I don't know.
Hugging the American flag, standing there for 40 fucking minutes while he keeps playing the same song, different versions of it over and over again, and just swaying back and forth.
YMCA.
Any of these things would have been, if we're using Howard Dean as like the barometer or whatever, the baseline, like any of these things would have been disqualifying. But
he had a simple "I have a scream" speech. Think of the typical Donald Trump speech.
There was in his first administration, there was newspapers were trying to keep a lie counter going, basically, but it broke. It went on tilt. The amount of lies this guy told.
I think it equaled the that debt counter thing.
Exactly.
It ended up tying that.
Actually, what they started doing was tracking the number of times he didn't lie, because it's just a lot easier to count.
I mean, you're hitting on kind of a next leveling up. It's not just about kind of weird things you say, but the willingness to just straight up lie and hold that lie as being true. I mean, politicians, of course, have a bad track history of lying, but it seems way ramped up, and that becomes acceptable.
One of the interesting things about Trump, though, is that he's willing to say things that are kind of true that people aren't willing to say that are part of the establishment. And that has been his appeal. So this is the bizarre thing about Trumpism is I remember one of the things he said early on, I guess this was in 2015 or whatever, was he attacked the previous Republican administration, the Bush administration, for the war in Iraq. And said, that was based upon lies, and that, I can't believe we did this. This weapon didn't exist. These people, the military adventures, and everyone was like aghast that he would call this out. So this is interesting. Like some of his transgressions are actually about saying things that are usually not said in polite company, but that may be true. And so this is, I think, how he became, popular in a sense. But that's what it was. That 1 out of 100. I don't know. It is bizarre.
But there's something talking about baselines. I think there's something there that's worth pointing out, which is it's not like there was a baseline of honesty and integrity from politicians that he came and transgressed. I think part of the dynamic that we're dealing with here is people distrust. Politicians have distrusted them. Politicians have been caught lying. We've seen cases of, maybe you want to say Nixon was, had already created a tremendous baseline shift in terms of people's sense of trusting politicians and what they said. And in fact, I think people like Pew have tracked these things over decades. So there's already a shift in the baseline, and people were not inured to lies, but they sort of anticipated lies. And then Trump was like, hold my beer. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you guys accept a few lies, let me give you all the lies.
Yeah, I think that's true. The other thing that's interesting, though, and I think was that Ezra Klein was pointing this out about just the idea that as a politician, you need to be very cautious about how you speak.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense that you're not being forthcoming. And part of it is this need almost to hide the full story in a sense for what kind of political calculation, or to make sure you don't, you're being diplomatic in a sense, but not necessarily just laying it all out, right? And we all know situations where you gently approach something rather than just speak your mind for reasons that are reasonable, or maybe you're trying to protect state secrets, or maybe you're not trying to tip off something you might know that could affect the markets, or disrupt some kind of a trade agreement you're getting into, or whatever, or undermine the public faith in institutions that you're trying to work to shore up. There's many reasons why politicians probably have to be less than fully forthcoming that is reasonable to expect. And so what's weird about Trump is that he kind of throws that all out, which is in some ways, I think, refreshing, but also potentially very dangerous. And that's why I think a lot of the establishment, it gets freaked out, especially when you put state secrets in your bathroom. So it's weird.
I think you're hitting a really interesting point, Jason, that is another way the baseline has been shifted. The point you just made about a politician trying to build up people's faith in public institutions or organizations, that's a real shift. That is not what Trump and company are trying to do whatsoever, right? You think about the shifting baseline of the role of a leader. You are the elected leader of the government of the United States of America. You are ostensibly there to govern, but there's been much more of a talk about tearing down and dividing rather than building up and uniting. And I think that leads, that's an excellent lead in to our next wonky lens for looking at the whole Trump presidency phenomenon. And that's the idea of entropy.
Yeah. No, entropy, that's a law of the universe, physics, second law, thermodynamics, and it has to do in a sense where you have, if matter and energy is concentrated, it'll tend to dissipate. And so you can sort of think of this as a tendency for things to go from order to disorder and sort of fall apart, right? And what most of what we try to do as a civilization is try to order things. You can imagine your household, right? You're constantly fighting the clothes on the floor and the dust mites or whatever, and the things spoiling in the refrigerator, and the gutters need to be cleaned, right? So you try to keep things from falling apart and maintain cohesion. And what you're seeing now is sort of this willingness, in a sense, to just break shit and then I don't know what. And so that's interesting. There's definitely enough people that elected Trump because they saw things were not working for them, and they were willing to go, I guess, the path of entropy, or fell for some promises of he's going to make things better somehow. But really, he seems like he's very much willing to just break things and doesn't seem beholden to this sort of, institutional management. If you go back a couple seasons ago, we did the false prophet season. And in that, we brought up the term accelerationism or accelerationists, which were these sort of hodgepodge of philosophies. But what they held in common was the idea that we need to accelerate the breakdown of civilization, which anyone who's an accelerationist, it tends to believe it's going to break on its own accord, right? That things are corrupt, but things are
breakdown of this civilization.
Or of these institutional norms, right? And the idea would be that your group, your ideology, will be the one that will then be able to finally, after this one breaks, to rebuild and rise from the ashes. And what I think, what you have that's very odd is sort of this two groups of accelerationists that seem to be together, and it comes some kind of coalition in sort of the Trump MAGA movement. And the one that's obvious to people that we've seen before and heard about and thought about are the Christian nationalists, right? And so somehow Trump is able to sell Bibles. They do like, powerful, patriarchal sort of situations. So there may be something he represents like that. And they believe there needs to be a breakdown of sort of this secular society. The one that's odd that sort of is in here as well, you get a notion of this when you saw Peter Thiel support Trump the first time, but now they've brought along a lot of sort of these Silicon Valley kind of tech bro types. Elon Musk, of course, is deep in this administration now. And these accelerationists are of a different kind. Peter Thiel is a monarchist, and they tend to be aligned with the idea that technology is going to be our savior. So their God is technology, is AI. And they're looking for they want to deregulate. They don't want the big administrative state on their backs. And they believe that they need someone like them, Musk, for example, to sort of be the CEO in power. Like this is sort of the CEO type needs to just take control and get us through this bottleneck where we can get to Mars or whatever, or colonize the stars.
You're missing a third group, which is, I think, been more of the, I don't want to use traditional because I don't refer to traditionalists, but the more typical longstanding Republican Party, which is, the Grover Norquist kind of wing of the Republican Party, which is to try to decrease the size of government so you could drown it in a bathtub. in a sense, what they're trying to do is break down. We're talking about entropy and breaking down things, right? They want to break down government because it has overstretched, its authority in a sense, right?
Kind of the hyper-libertarians in a sense, yes.
Exactly. And that's been the Republican Party for a long time. So what you have in common between these three is basically saying this kind of modern, largely secular society that's kind of run by these educated elites in cities.
Yeah.
Basically, what they're espousing and believing needs to change, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have people coming together and people voting for these kind of 2 or 3 different branches within the kind of the Trump regime.
Yeah.
Basically want to tear it down. The problem is, this is why entropy is so key. It is so much easier to break things than to build things or repair things. And so, people could talk about, well, we'll get to the next 4 years or whatever. There's going to be a swing back, or even in 2 years, there'll be a swing back, in Congress. But what could be broken and the amount of energy it takes to break something is a lot less than the amount of energy it takes to rebuild it.
There's an add-on danger to that as well. I had this explained to me once by a medical professional with regard to the gut biome. It's like if your gut is not operating correctly and you've got all these different microbes in there and they're the wrong mix, you can have stomach problems. And I had just asked, well, what if you go in with antibiotics and you just wipe out your gut biome and start from scratch? And she told me, she was like, well, that would be terrible. Because you can think of it just like agriculture. So, Jason, maybe you could probably explain this better than I could. But if you've got a field with crops on it and some weeds, if you just take a plow and just blank slate that thing, it's the weeds that are going to come back in and colonize, because they're the ones that are good at that. When you've got the disaster, it's the weeds that colonize. It's the really aggressive microbiome that colonizes your gut. It's the really aggressive politicians that colonize the government. And so it's not only that it's harder to build back, it's exceptionally hard to build back when you've still got people in there who are going to build something hideous, or who are just continuing the entropic path.
Now, we do have people who have been careerists in the government. You used to be one, Rob, who who actually understand how things work and keep the lights on and all that. The question is, how many of them will be pushed out, will leave, will retire, and then all that institutional knowledge is just utterly gone.
Well, it's really interesting to me. Like you said, I was in the federal government for 7 years, and I saw all kinds of different colleagues and professionals, and some of them were incredible. I think they're the kind of people you're talking about. Like I ran into biologists who were incredibly dedicated and were doing innovative techniques to conserve species, to protect ecosystems, really important work on the landscape. And I was blown away by how good they were at their jobs. There were also what you could call some dead weight in the offices. I don't want to make fun of anybody or tell us. Yeah, that's why I'm out, obviously. Yeah. Just like on this podcast, maybe all 3 of us qualify as dead weight. But you can find those stories easily, and you see why people like what is this new agency that Elon Musk and Vivek are running? Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency. You can see why.
They're just trolling us, man. They're just trolling us.
But you can see why they have some legitimate gripes, right? It is hard to fire federal employees, and there are some people that don't do a whole lot in there. But I think your broader point, Asher, is that even if you're trying to trim out people that aren't that effective, they're also out to get rid of the professionals who probably are good at their jobs. They just aren't doing things that they would like to see them do.
Yeah.
Or they're regulators who are regulating, Elon Musk's industries of choice.
What is weird is that, and one of the things that we think about is yes, are we going to have these bureaucracies have been set up for a long time to prevent things from changing too fast. So there's only so many political appointees, and you got these careers. There's a process by which you can replace them. You can't just You're not supposed to just be able to fire them en masse. You can make their life more difficult, but you can't get rid of them completely that easily. You could change things pretty fast with the 3 branches of government and like defund like crazy, I guess. So there are ways, right?
There's a whole Schedule F thing, isn't it? I mean, this is something that has been in the works to try to figure out how they could do more of that wholesale change quickly.
Yeah, Schedule F. What's that? Explain that.
It's basically, I think, something is sort of in the rule book that allows, sort of governs how these things are done. And there's been a strategy. I mean, we've got the Project 2025 people who've been, collecting resumes,
right,
for a couple of years now for Trump to come in, so it's interesting. It's like, accelerating entropy is maybe what we're dealing with here that we have to face. Let's talk about, this is actually to me, the craziest crazy town part of this thing, but it's maybe a slightly more positive, way of looking at, Trump's second term, which is really weird to talk about, that there might be some positives that come from
this is the happy part of the show.
This very negative, in my view, I'll be honest, worrisome, frightening, God, I could throw lots of superlatives at you.
Yeah, more adjective,
dynamic.
scared, collapsy, and
and it's just patently surreal,
surreal.
And I think only people who kind of inhabit the part of the crazy town, world that we live in will get what I'm talking about here. But here we have a guy and people behind him who are coming in with policies and ideas of things that they want to do that are potentially incredibly ruinous, but might actually, whether it's done by intention or not, hasten things that we've been talking about for a long time. So, for example,
are we kind of accelerationists in a sense, but we want to just be nicer about it? I mean, what's the deal here?
But this is the crazy town piece of it. I mean, it's like you look at so let's just take some of the examples of things. Donald Trump wants to put these, broad scale tariffs across the board,
right.
and
Awesome.
certain ones being more extreme than others, right?
Right.
And that will be extremely damaging, to the economy. It will particularly hurt, consumers who don't have a lot of discretionary income to spend. Talk about inflation, which was, people say was a major driver of the way people voted. This really risks, on consumer products, everything basically, that because even stuff that is manufactured here is often, depends upon, resources, materials that come from overseas. So it's likely to raise the cost of everything if he
90% of everything that you're touching was on a container ship over the ocean, probably, and then everything else, and then everything has been on a truck, probably, right? So So
let's say he actually follows through with this. It would be extremely damaging for a lot of people, but would it not also lead to a reduction in consumption, which is something that we at PCI have been arguing for a super long time? Wouldn't it also contract the economy, which is the only
CO2
thing
emissions might go down.
that has dropped CO2 emissions over the decades? I mean,
it's like a degrowth plan.
Exactly.
It's a degrowth plan.
This puts us in the weirdest of all positions because, yes, we're a limits to growth organization, believing that if the farther out on that overshoot ledge we get, the harder and higher the fall is going to be.
Right.
And so whatever we can do to kind of gently and use good management to pull back away from that cliff's edge, great.
But that's not happening.
Well, so this is the thing, like the whole Trump administration, they're not calling for degrowth.
Gentle is not.
But some of these, policy ideas, like if you wreck the global economy or at least damage it, people are going to feel the pain. And that's, I said, puts you in a weird position. Like, I'm not up for that.
And it won't be the Elon Musks of the world that will be feeling the pain, or the Donald Trumps.
Of course not. Yeah, it's always going to be the people with the least power and who are the most vulnerable. But it could be better than postponing these kinds of reckonings, another 10 years out when the climate is worse and the inequality is worse. And, it's like we start to to, I call it inadvertently respect the limits to growth through kind of messed up policy ideas.
But that's what's so crazy making about this is for people maybe view the global situation the way that we do, thinking about our choices for, who we would want to kind of steer the ship of, the U.S. economy and the U.S. society and by extension, a lot of the rest of the world. You've got on the one side, leadership in a party that wants to maintain the status quo, which is doing exactly what you're saying, Rob. That's just continuing. It's a Wile E. Coyote sort of thing, like going off the edge of the cliff and not realizing, that you have yet. Or basically somebody who wants to burn it all down in the most callous, cruel, ways possible and not very well organized and well thought through.
Yeah.
Those are shitty options,
Think of the
we're faced with.
Lies of the Biden administration that just drove us crazy. Remember what was the Earth Day talk about greening the military?
Yeah, we're going to have the greenest military on Earth. He wasn't talking about the paint colors on the tanks. Like, what are they going to run aircraft carriers on?
The best
Goodwill?
one was Biden just before the election saying, people say that we can't continue to grow oil and gas production in the United States.
Yeah.
And, do the energy transition. They're wrong.
And
We're
take
America.
care of climate.
Yeah.
We could do both.
Wasn't there some guy at the current
COP,
Azerbaijan or has a COP meeting right now in Baku or whatever? Yeah. Wasn't there one of these leaders of that was just caught trying to make deals for oil and gas? And saying that, no, we need these fuels for our transition. These people are so full of bullshit. But it gives the illusion that somebody's doing something. And I think people like that. I think people like the illusion that something's happening for the good, even while they're just consuming the earth. And so now what we have is we have people that I consider really bizarre, but they have the lack of filter, or they're so out there, ideologically, that they're willing to go so against all this stuff. So an example would be like Joel Salatin, that apparently has accepted some position as some assistant, blah, 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 for the Secretary of Agriculture.
Is he doing sign language translation for them as well?
Yeah.
Explain who Joel Salatin is, just in case folks don't know.
There's a guy named Michael Pollan, who's a UC Berkeley professor, who was writing about the food system. This book, Omnivore's Dilemma, became very famous, best-selling author, New York Times writer, blah, blah, blah. And he did this whole chapter on Joel Salatin. It was this, I think, Virginia farmer, and was at a whole new way of doing farming, which was multi-species on the land, a family farm, not tilling.
Sounds more like a whole old way of doing farming.
It was kind of a mix because of the way he was marketing stuff, and he was shipping stuff around the country. It was kind of weird.
Rotating
rotating the crops, rotating the animals mostly. He wasn't doing anything, but pigs and chickens and cattle and sheep and everything. Anyway, the dealie was he became super popular in sort of the eco-ag circles, and he would go to these meetings and give these fiery speeches, and he's all like kind of folksy fire and brimstone eco babble stuff, and it all sounds wonderful. And then he ends up, you find out he's one of these Norquist kind of guys, hyper libertarian, hates big corporations though, right? Hates the big ag. And so it's one of these things where the far left, the horseshoe kind of political thing, where the far left are. So he's super Christian, anti-abortion, and so he's got these sort of right political views, but because he's anti-corporate, he's ecological minded in a way, he's got these left views, and now he's like, being put in this position of power.
That's like RFK Jr., right?
It's kind of like half the time you're like, thank you, yes, we need to focus
and that's
more
so weird. Like here we have this
on
guy
diet and exercise and lifestyle.
Nominated for the head of HHS, and
don't vaccinate anybody.
But also,
but big pharma sucks.
Yeah, big pharma sucks, and let's go after industrial ag. Let's get pesticides out of the soil.
It's like USDA.
It's such a weird reality for us to be swimming in, because some of these things are like nodding along, and then it's like, holy shit, what the hell? What are these people talking about? It's a bizarre thing, and but we could lead to, I mean, think about it. People talked about with election, the price of eggs being like this kind of like signal, this driver, people wanting to throw the bums out, What's going to happen to the price of eggs when, there's like, they've deported all of the people who work on in these egg factories for the 4 companies that basically dominate egg manufacturing. Is really a manufacturing operation. In the United States.
Does everyone start growing their own eggs? There's a backyard
people
chicken
get their own
flourishing.
chickens. Exactly.
I mean,
it's so weird.
I think that's a pretty good lead-in to maybe a short discussion of how the hell you resist during this time. I mean, if we're talking about the entrance of Trump 2.0 through this lens of shifted baseline and entropy and the upside and down, it's like, okay, how the hell am I supposed to navigate this? And it really returns right back to the idea of get as engaged as you can in your local community, on your own little street, your own neighborhood, and figure out what things can we produce ourselves? I mean, that's always good for the emergency setup. It's also always, it's really good in the light of if some of these Trump policies do go into effect and things become prohibitively expensive, or you can't get products that maybe you would need. How much can you work with your neighbors to produce what you need?
And your neighbors are unlikely to turn you in if you're providing them eggs. Right?
Well, fair point.
I mean, I think, Jason, it would be cool actually for you to describe the farm club that you've...
Farming club. It's
sorry.
An active verb.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Didn't mean to leave off the ing.
Okay,
The farming club.
You're such a farmist.
Well, okay. It's I'm a small farmer, kind of half time because I make no money or I lose money, and so I go part time with a tennis instructor. My shoulder busts, so I have to have a one-handed backhand. And anyway, so there's this long story about like I'm not happy what I was trying to do. I was really hurting myself physically farming and it wasn't kind of worth it financially. And then I was kind of bummed out because it's hard to get it all right.
Doing what's right by the land isn't necessarily great for the bank account. And I think you chose to be an ecologically sound farmer rather than a money-making farmer. I think if you were
loser.
I know.
Total loser.
Yeah, that's a way to put it. You decided to be a jackass rather than a decent contributing member of society.
Well, and the only reason I can do this is because my wife loves me. And so I'm supported. But anyhow, so what I did was that I said, okay, I'm not going to try to grow food for other people. I'm going to try to teach other people, and I want other people out here working with me to grow food for themselves and each other. I think this is I think it's actually could be, instead of Rotary clubs sweeping the nation, I think farming clubs should. I honestly think it's a good idea. Because, what people are going to need to do is have something purposeful to do with themselves that builds community, decommodifies something that's likely to get more expensive, builds useful skills and relationships over time, and actually improves sort of the landscape in the which they now inhabit as an ecological being. And so that's what I want to encourage people to do: re-inhabit the landscape as an omnivore, let's say, right? And how do you do this if you're somebody with a desk job and you happen, if you're lucky enough to know me, the kind of this crazy person, great. But how do we get this so it's easier for other people to do this? Yeah. And so that it goes beyond, my friends. And that's what I'm really curious about. Like, there could be an incredible movement of this. And I want to talk to Joel Salatin and RFK Jr. about this. If they need a tennis coach, I'm here for them. Before and after the lesson, we can talk about these things, but let's get to know each other a little bit. All right. I want to know your strengths and weaknesses on the court.
On a more serious note, can I just say, I think you brought up this question, Rob, but how do we practice resistance? What do we do sort of in this as we're entering Trump 2.0? And I'm going to just offer another version of the 3 Rs, which is not new to me. I mean, people have used this before, but I think is really instructive and helpful, and that is resistance, resilience, and regeneration, right? And
that's good.
There are things that we have to resist, that are about our core values as people, wanting to resist the entropy or the destruction of our institutions, of our democratic institutions, the rights of people in this country, not only ourselves, but others. These are core values. So we have to practice resistance to things that are beyond the pale. We have to practice resilience because there's just going to be so much, even without a Trump, administration coming in, there's already so much unraveling of the status quo in any case. So building resilience is like a key strategy to doing that. And that may be doing things like, creating farming clubs or, getting backyard chickens. And it may also be taking care of ourselves. I mean, I think there's going to be so many horrors, that on a daily basis, I think that those of us who have certain values are going to be put in front of us. So taking care of ourselves, mental health stuff, getting off of Instagram, Jason, is important, and then the regeneration really has to do with stitching, stitching back these connections to land, to the community, to creating either new institutions or rebuilding the institutions that have helped people kind of figure out how to have their needs met and thrive for millennia,
Yeah. I really worry about the meanness that has sort of taken over the world. And, from the top, you have this person that just represents kind of the worst aspects of human nature, and they were put in charge. And what kind of toxic garbage is spewed out from the highest levels, and what that does to people who also are, have issues with this in their history or are at risk of being abused. And I think being really nice and in your life saying, no, I'm not going to accept any of that, I think is going to be really important. Like, we can't let that part of human nature take over.
That's a really good point. I think it ties with what you said, Asher, about the resistance piece of holding our core values. And I think kindness and human decency, we've talked about relationship to nature and those kinds of things. And it makes me really scared because the three of us do not exemplify this whatsoever. I mean, you guys make fun of me nonstop.
I don't like this. I think we took this too far. That means I can't take that job with Alex Jones.
No.
You're talking about being respectful?
That's
can't
right.
be walking around flipping people off.
No more F-bombs for a share in subsequent episodes. That's your kind of like new election resolution.
No, that's not.
What are we going to do?
Rob, I really
There's no fucking way that's going to happen, Rob.
See, there you go again. That was very mocking.
Asher, I
Always.
appreciate you too.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet.
Okay.
All right. Well, with appreciation, see you next time.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you want others to consider these issues, then please share Crazy Town with your friends. Hit that share button in your podcast app or just tell them face to face. Maybe you can start some much needed conversations and do some things together to get us out of Crazy Town. Thanks again for listening and sharing.
When the triumphant new Trump administration takes over and starts shoring up the economy for billionaires, you're going to want to get in on the action. The only problem is, you're probably not a psychopathic narcissist. Don't worry though, we can fix that. Welcome to the Bloviation Institute. Our proven 3-week course launched the careers of luminaries like Alex Jones, Darth Vader, and all the Bundys, from Cliven to Ammon to Al to Ted. You can master the 3 traits you'll need to latch onto Donald Trump's teat and start the money milking process. In week 1 at the Bloviation Institute, you'll learn how to follow a small lie with a bigger lie to keep your audience perpetually confused. For example, the doctor said, "I have the body of a 30-year-old. Oh, and Bill Clinton is a shape-shifting lizard from the planet Slobberon. In week 2, You'll learn how to make insane claims with wild abandon. For example, you'll learn how to say things like, "Some people say that I'm the greatest lover since the Big Bang." In week 3, you'll learn how to short-circuit that pesky sense of humility and start believing not just everything that comes out of your mouth, but also everything that comes out of your anus. Call 1-800-BLOVIATE and enroll today.
Crazy town, da 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 da, crazy town.